In this video, we'll be looking at a picture of goats in a tree. Actually, we'll be looking at the topic of control of the heartbeat. So, in the previous video, I talked about the structure of the heart, so the names and the parts, and how blood flows through the heart to the lungs and to the rest of your body. Okay, but now we're going to be talking about how the heart beats the way it does. Why does it beat every second, or if you're very fit, every 2 seconds? Why does it continuously beat? What controls it? Why does it do that? Maybe you haven't thought of that, and a way for me to make it realistic to you is the heart is pretty much just a muscle. Okay, just like the one in your arm, it's a muscle. Now, why does the muscle in your arm not every 2 seconds or every second move? Like, why does your arm not contract every second? But with the heart, it does. Why is that? That's because the heart is a cardiac muscle. So even though it's a muscle, it's a different kind of muscle than the one in your arm. The one in your arm, or your leg, or your face is called a skeletal muscle. So these are two different kinds of muscles, and therefore they work slightly different. So we'll get into the exact mechanism just now. So first and foremost, here we got the heart. We don't care about the outside of the heart. We care about how it looks inside of the heart. So pretend we slice open the heart right open so we can see what's on the inside, okay? Real quick, here's a box, right? In this box, there's a lot of keywords, okay, which I will explain. And if you can nail and understand all these keywords by the end of this video, then you understand everything you need to know about control of the heartbeat, how the heart works. How the heart is controlled. So the orange words here will be general terms that are concept terms, which I'll get to. And these words here, the orange in the orange boxes, these are structures that I will label in the heart later, which you can't see right now because I'll label them soon. And these right here are words that describe how the heart can be affected. What can make the heart beat faster, what can make it beat slower, and so on, okay? So these words, that's the aim for today. First, wait 1 second. Okay, first, I'm going to put these lungs here just so we get a better understanding. So these are tiny lungs. Your lungs are much, much, much bigger than your heart each. So I'm just putting them here so you know these pipes go to the heart, and so these 3 pipes go to and from the heart, to and from the lungs, and then this big pipe here and this big pipe, these 2 big pipes here come from the body and go to the body, okay? So remember, there are four chambers, the 2 atriums, atrium here, atrium there, and the left atrium, so this one, because we're speaking from the perspective of the heart, receives blood from the lungs, so fresh oxygenated blood, because we know the lungs provide oxygen to your blood, and so this fresh oxygen gets pumped into your ventricles, and this ventricle here will then pump that freshly oxygenated blood through this red pipe called the aorta to the rest of your body to give your body all the fresh oxygen it needs. On the contrary, on the right side of the heart, we got the right atrium. This one receives blood from your body. So all the, I can basically call it dirty blood that has no oxygen. So it's basically useless blood. So it receives all that useless deoxygenated blood because your tissues just used all the oxygen, and it takes it in and it brings it to this right atrium from the top of your body, so the upper body and your lower body, through the vena cava. These are called the vena cavas. And then it will take this from the right atrium, pump it into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle will then pump all this blood to your lung, as you can see here, to this lung and then to that lung, because like I said, this blood was dirty. So we want it to become clean and have oxygen in them, and that's why we send it to the lungs, because then the lungs will give it oxygen and give it to the right atrium, which will then repeat the process, okay? As I mentioned before, your heart is a cardiac muscle, and this here is a skeletal muscle. Your skeletal muscle can be controlled by your head only, right? You have to think about moving your arm before it will move, but you don't have to think about beating your heart. Imagine if you had to think about beating your heart every second. You would probably die because you might forget, right? So it's actually a very good thing that our heart is not controlled by our brain. It beats by itself, and this is the first term we're going to get to. This term is called myogenic. Our heart is myogenic, which means it beats completely and utterly by itself. It has its own internal mechanism. It does not depend on your brain. The way it beats naturally, when you're sitting still right now, does not depend on your brain at all. It beats by itself. It has its own mechanism. Unlike the skeletal muscle, which is controlled by your brain. Your brain has to send signals to your muscle to contract. You have to actually think about moving your arm or moving your leg. Okay, so that's the important term. Myogenic. It just means automatic. Your heart is automatic. It contracts and sends blood around by itself. And we know the term cardiac muscle. That is the muscle that the heart is made of. Okay, we know the heart pumps and moves stuff around, so it needs to be able to move. Therefore, we know it is a muscle, just like your skeletal muscle is a muscle. Let's get to this one. Heart transplant, before we get into complicated stuff. So the heart transplant, the first ever heart transplant was done in Cape Town, South Africa, my home country, a while back. And you don't need to know the date or anything like that. Just know that there has been heart transplants, and now they occur quite frequently. So you can actually, if you have a very bad heart, get somebody else's heart put into you and have it work properly. So if you have a very bad heart or a diseased heart, you can actually get somebody else's and live better. Okay, so now let's get into this. So in your heart is made up of two types of cells. Contracting cells, so the ones that cause it to move, and conducting cells. Conducting cells are the cells that are gonna cause it to move. Okay, so because we know your muscles in your arms can move, but not unless they're told to move. That's the same thing with your heart. Only your heart is not told to move by your brain, but told to move by one of its cells inside it. Okay, so there are two of these zones. There's one zone in the right atrium, and there's one zone around here between the atrium and the ventricle. There's a zone here. Okay. The zone in the right atrium is called the SA node. Okay. The Sino-Atrial Node. Sino because sino means normal, and atrial means atrium. So it's in the atrium, and it controls the normal heart rhythm, the Sino-Atrial Node. And then there's another one called the Atrioventricular Node, which is right there. And remember, this is not like a special kind of structure. All this zone is heart cells that are slightly modified. They don't contract. They do something slightly different from contracting. They cause the rhythm of the heart to be, they stimulate the heart to contract. They make the rhythm of the heart. So they're still heart cells. They're not some special material. They're just cells, slightly modified versions of normal contracting heart cells. Okay. Atrioventricular, because it's between the atrium and the ventricle, the zone. And this one, we'll get to soon, is not responsible for your normal heart rhythm. Like I said, sino means normal, and atrium is the location. So the sinoatrial node, this one in your right atrium, is responsible for your normal heart rhythm, which is like 70 beats per minute, okay? The atrioventricular node is not responsible for that. You'll see what this one is responsible for soon. And then we have something called bundle of His. Let me move this. Okay. So this, right, what I'm showing right here, is just structures. I'll explain the process soon. So the bundle of His is this zone right here. It's this. These are also different from these cells here, called the bundle of His, is also made from the same kind of material as these two cells. So there's some, even though there's some muscle here, like if you remove this, there is some muscle here which can help contracting, but there's also dispersed in between these muscle cells some bundle of His cells, which are also conducting cells, or cells that help stimulate contraction, because the muscle cells won't contract by themselves. They need these conducting cells in between them to tell them to contract, right? So these cells right here, in this zone here, before they split off. So when it's singular, that's the bundle of His. And when they split off and go to the left ventricle and to the right ventricle around here, in between the muscle cells, that is called Purkinje fibers. And fibers does not mean it's neurons or anything like that. It just means it behaves like neurons. It stimulates, like the brain, it stimulates the muscles to contract. So don't think fibers suddenly means neurons or different kinds of cells. It's still a heart cell, but a modified version of the heart cell that stimulates the muscles to contract. Okay, so how exactly does the heart, how exactly does all these components make the heart contract in an effective manner? So it all starts with the Sino-Atrial Node. Around every second, the Sino-Atrial Node, because like I said, this one controls your normal heart rhythm. This is the most important one, the SA node. It sends out signals every second, okay? It sends out signals to your atriums. Okay, so when it sends out these signals, as you can see, I'm trying to make it clear as possible. So these arrows represent sending out to the right atrium to contract, and these send a signal all across the heart to the left atrium. Okay. Okay, so when these signals sent, when it reaches the muscle of the right and the left atrium, it causes them to contract. Okay. Wait a second. Ignore this arrow. No, don't ignore that arrow. So it sends a signal to these to contract, because remember, the blood comes from the lungs into here and from the rest of the body into the right atrium. But it needs to move to the left, to the right ventricle and the left ventricle, right? So how does it do that? So when the Sino-Atrial Node sends this signal, it travels extremely quickly to these muscle cells and tell them to contract. So as soon as they contract, the blood will move here, okay? But the important part here is when this signal is being sent to the left atrium and the right atrium, it also travels to this thing here called the Atrioventricular Node. This node takes that signal and sends it into the bundle of His, which then turns into the Purkinje fibers. And you can see this signal travels to the ventricles. Okay. So why, the question from me to you is, why does the whole heart not contract at once? So when this signal is being sent here, and this signal sends here, why does the whole heart not contract at once? Why does the atriums and the ventricles not contract at the same time? Because imagine if they were to contract at the same time, as the second this one contracts, and the blood will actually go nowhere. It's like squeezing a bag full of water everywhere. Nothing is going to happen to it. It's not going to go anywhere you want it to go, right? So the reason why they don't contract at the same time is because of the AV node, the Atrioventricular Node. When this signal is being sent from the right atrium, from the right atrium to from this SA node to the right and the left atrium, they get stimulated. And as soon as this signal reaches here, which is the pathway it gets to the ventricles, this AV node slows down the signal. Okay, so as it travels here and gets to this place and travels there to the atriums, this one takes that signal and slows it down so it doesn't travel so fast down here. Okay, so as it slows it down, the left and the right ventricle gets the signal and contracts. And then like a half a second later or a split second later, this one will send out the signal and the ventricles will contract. That way, the atriums contract before the ventricles. So the atriums can send out all the blood here, and then the ventricles will contract to send that blood that came in from the atriums out there. Because if the atrium and the ventricles were to contract together, then the blood being sent here will immediately be sent back by this one, because the blood is coming through and it's being pumped back, or it'll just be a mess, you can imagine. So the AV node is extremely important to make sure that the signal being sent from the SA node to the right atrium and the left atrium does not go to the ventricle so quickly. it slows the signal down so that the ventricle receives that signal slightly later, allowing the atriums to pump the blood into the ventricles first, and then for the ventricles to be able to pump it afterwards to the rest of to the lungs and the rest of the body. Okay, so that's the cool thing about the AV node. It slows it down, and this SA node allows the heart to be myogenic, right? Because it makes the signal randomly every second. It sends out these signals every second for the heart to contract, so that the brain doesn't do anything. It's the heart by itself. Now, think about your own heartbeat. How often does your heart beat? Like, feel your pulse. Where can you feel your pulse? In your neck, in your wrist, on your chest. A lot of places, right? How often does your heart beat? So for me, it's pretty much average. Every 70 beats per minute, I would say. But if you're an extremely fit athlete, your heart can actually beat around 30 beats per minute. So think about that. That's 1 every 2 seconds. So that's like doof, doof. That's really slow. Whereas for me, it's like doof, doof, doof. It's quite normal. Whereas if you're an athlete, your heart beats extremely slowly. And that just means that this SA node sends out signals more slowly. So it doesn't send it out every second, but maybe every 2 seconds. So another question I have for you is, why is it a good, doesn't it mean you're more fit if your heart beats faster? Because that means your heart can work more? No, that's not true. So athletes have slower heart rates because their hearts are actually stronger than a normal person. So that means if they have a stronger heart, they can pump out more blood to the rest of your body than a normal heart can in one beat. That means a normal person needs to have 2 heartbeats to send out the same amount of blood than an athlete does in 1 heartbeat. So our hearts are weaker, so it needs to pump more to send out the same amount of blood than an athlete who can just send out a crap load of blood in 1 heartbeat. Okay, so fitter people do have slower heartbeat because their hearts are stronger. Okay, and that means that that means their heart can handle a lot of pressure, because athletes can then do so much exercise, or they can run so fast or so far, because their heart takes longer to beat as fast as a normal person. Because for example, if you start running and you're unfit, your heart will reach 190 beats per minute really quickly, and you'll get very tired quickly. Whereas an athlete will have to run really fast and really far before their heart reaches the same pace as yours. Okay, so the last part we're getting to now is what controls your heart. So right now we talked about the normal heartbeat. So what makes your heartbeat go faster? Have you ever noticed when you're extremely scared, your heart just goes, right? Goes much faster. What causes that? So there's 3 things. Epinephrine, your sympathetic nervous system, and your parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so the 2 that cause your heartbeat to increase from these 3 is epinephrine and your sympathetic nervous system. So epinephrine, let's pretend this is epinephrine, this molecule here. It is released from your adrenal glands. So your adrenal glands are right above your kidney, okay? And as soon as you get stressed, your adrenal glands will release this protein into your blood, and it will travel in your blood, and eventually it will reach your heart, and it will eventually reach this node. And when it reaches this node, it tells that node to speed up, to make the heart work faster, because you're stressed and you need more blood at the rest of your body. Because when you're stressed out and you think you're going to have a terrible situation, you might need more oxygen, more blood to your muscles, so you can perform better, so you can fight off that person or whatever you're doing. So that's what epinephrine does. It speeds up the rate of the SA node. And your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system are to do with your brain. So your brain, let's put your brain here. It's up there in your head, right? Your brain sends out neurons to basically everywhere in your body, okay? And neurons are just brain cells. And brain cells control everything you do, okay? So if we think about it, a neuron comes out of your brain. It's much smaller. This neuron's massive, okay? But it sends it out of your brain to the heart. So when you get stressed out, just like your adrenal gland releases epinephrine, when you're stressed, your brain stimulates your sympathetic nerves. So the nerves that cause you to your heart rate to increase and you to be stressed, because S for stress. S for stress. So when you're stressed, the sympathetic nervous system is going to be stimulated, and that's going to cause your heartbeat to increase and you to get more alert. So this nerve will go to your heart and tell this SA node, just like epinephrine did, to speed up. Like, you gotta go beat faster. We need more blood. We need more oxygen. We need to. We're gonna need to fight now, or whatever. And the reverse situation, when you're extremely relaxed, that's the parasympathetic nervous system, or in other words, the vagus nerve. So it will stimulate this parasympathetic nervous system, and it will send it to your SA node and tell it to slow down. So for example, when you're super relaxed, you're on holiday, you're about to sleep, your brain sends through the parasympathetic nervous system to your SA node and tells it to relax, beat more slowly, maybe once every second instead of 10 times a second. Okay, so it tells it to slow down. So I hope this all made sense about how the heart is controlled and what it all means. If you understand all these keywords, then you've pretty much nailed it. So overall, heart is myogenic, starts from the SA node, lets the atriums contract. The AV node slows down the signal so that the ventricles, contract a bit later. The ventricles are stimulated to contract by the bundle of His and the Purkinje fibers. Purkinje fibers here, bundle of His here, and that's pretty much it. I hope that made sense.